I'm Maria, 32 female. I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside a major city, in a house I bought with my own savings 2 years ago. As a senior UX designer for a global tech firm, I worked hard for this little slice of peace, and it was my sanctuary. Little did I know that my sanctuary was about to be invaded by the one person I should have been able to trust the most, leading to a calculated act of revenge that would redefine my understanding of family forever. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My life up until the incident was a carefully constructed testament to discipline and ambition. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. In fact, it was quite the opposite. My father, Antonio, was a mechanic who believed in hard work, but also in traditional family roles. He loved me, I think, but he revered my younger brother, Marco. In his eyes, Marco, the son, was the legacy. I was just the daughter who would eventually marry and become someone else's responsibility. This old-world mentality fueled a fire in me from a young age. I was determined to be my own legacy, to be reliant on no one. While Marco was coasting through life, charming his way out of trouble and hopping between get-rich-quick schemes, I was hitting the books. I earned scholarships, graduated with honors, and climbed the corporate ladder with a relentless focus that often left me feeling isolated, even within my own family. Buying my house was the ultimate symbol of my independence. It was a beautiful 2-story home with a small, manicured garden worth $500,000. It was my name on the deed, my money making the mortgage payments. It was mine. My father was outwardly proud, but I could always detect a faint undercurrent of something else. Discomfort, maybe. He'd say things like, "It's a big house for one person," or, "You must be lonely in there." Marco was more direct. He'd walk through the rooms during family visits, a smirk on his face, saying, "Must be nice. When I hit it big with my crypto portfolio, I'll get one twice this size." At the time, I brushed it off as typical sibling jealousy. I had no idea it was rooted in a deep, rotting sense of entitlement that our father had cultivated for years. The opportunity came on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. My company was launching a major project in our London office, and they needed a senior UX designer to lead the team on the ground for 6 months. It was a massive career boost, a chance to prove my leadership skills on an international stage. The pay was fantastic, and they'd cover my London flat. The only catch was the timeline. I had to leave in 3 weeks. It was a whirlwind of planning, but the excitement overshadowed the stress. The biggest question was what to do with my house. Leaving it empty for 6 months felt wrong, and I worried about security. I mentioned this during our weekly family dinner. My dad, Antonio, immediately saw an opening. "Let Marco stay there," he said, not as a suggestion, but as a statement of fact. He and Isabella are paying a fortune for that tiny apartment downtown. It would help them save up, and they can look after the place for you. Marco, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "Yeah, Maria, that would be amazing. We'd be super careful. Water the plants, collect the mail, everything. It would be like we're not even here." His girlfriend, Isabella, chimed in, her voice sweet as honey. "We would be the perfect house sitters. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I hesitated. My relationship with Marco was strained. He was constantly asking for money, spinning tales of crypto investments that were just about to pay off. But the alternative was hiring a stranger or leaving the house vacant. My father pressed on. "He's your brother, Maria. Family helps family. This is what we do." The guilt trip was a classic Antonio move, and as usual, it worked. I felt a pang of selfishness for even hesitating. Maybe this was a chance to mend fences with Marco. Maybe having this responsibility would help him mature. "Okay," I agreed, laying out the ground rules. "You can stay in the guest room. My office and my master bedroom are off limits. You're responsible for paying the utility bills while you're here. I'll forward them to you. No parties, no major changes, you're guests." They both nodded enthusiastically, agreeing to everything. We signed a simple, informal agreement I typed up, outlining the terms. I felt a sense of relief. My house would be safe, and I'd be helping my brother. It felt like the right, sisterly thing to do. The last few weeks before my flight were a blur of packing and project handovers. I walked Marco and Isabella through the house, showing them the water shutoff valve, the fuse box, and how to opera. The security system. I reiterated the rules, pointing specifically to my bedroom door. This door stays closed. All my personal things are in here. Marco waved a dismissive hand. Got it, sis. Don't worry so much. Go to London, rock your project. We'll hold down the fort. My last memory of him at the house before I left for the airport was of him standing on my porch, waving, with a smile that I, in my naivety, mistook for gratitude. In reality, it was the smile of a fox who had just been handed the keys to the henhouse. The 6 months in London were a resounding success. The project launched ahead of schedule, my team exceeded all its targets, and I earned a significant promotion to a director-level position. I worked long hours, immersing myself in the challenge. It was exhilarating, and I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. My communication with my family back home was sporadic. I'd have short, weekly video calls with my dad, who would give me brief updates. Everything's fine, he'd say. Marco is doing a good job with the house. When I asked to speak to Marco, he was always conveniently out. I'd send texts asking how things were, and he'd reply with one-word answers. Good, fine, all good. Isabella would occasionally post pictures on social media, but they were always selfies of them out at restaurants or clubs. I never saw any photos taken inside my house, which, at the time, I took as a sign of respect for my privacy. I foolishly thought they were upholding their end of the bargain. I was so wrapped up in my work that I didn't press the issue. I trusted them. I trusted my father's judgment. That was my second mistake. My return was meant to be a surprise. I wanted to see the genuine looks on their faces. I booked my flight to land a day before my official return date and took a cab from the airport directly to my house. As the cab turned onto my street, my stomach clenched. Something was off. There were more cars parked along the curb than usual. As we pulled up to my driveway, I saw it was blocked by a flashy, bright blue sports car that I knew for a fact Marco couldn't afford. The garden I had so meticulously cared for was overgrown with weeds, and my porch was cluttered with empty bottles and a discarded pizza box. My heart started to pound. This wasn't the holding down the fort I had envisioned. I paid the driver and walked up my own walkway, a feeling of dread washing over me. As I got closer, I could hear loud music and a cacophony of laughter coming from my backyard. A party. A big one. So much for no parties. I used my key, but it wouldn't turn in the lock. Confused, I tried again. It was jammed. They had changed the locks. My own house, and I was locked out. A cold fury began to bubble beneath my shock. I walked around the side of the house, my suitcase bumping along the flagstones, and pushed open the gate to the backyard. The scene that greeted me was one of utter chaos. There were at least 40 people crammed onto my patio and lawn. A makeshift bar was set up on my outdoor dining table, and someone had set up huge speakers that were blasting music. My beautiful rose bushes were trampled, and there were cigarette butts floating in my bird bath. And there, in the center of it all, was Marco, holding a beer, regaling a crowd with some loud story. Isabella was beside him, laughing, looking every bit the queen of the castle. My father, Antonio, was manning the grill, flipping burgers as if this was the most normal thing in the world. He saw me first. His eyes widened, and the spatula in his hand clattered onto the patio stones. The small group around him fell silent, and like a wave, the silence spread across the yard as everyone turned to look at me, the stranger with the suitcase. Marco's smile froze on his face. He quickly recovered, plastering on a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Maria, you're back early. We were just throwing you a surprise welcome home party." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it took my breath away. A welcome home party for me, where no one, including me, was aware I was coming home. My gaze swept over the yard, taking in the damage, the strangers lounging on my furniture, the sheer disrespect of it all. A party. I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Marco, we had an agreement." My father stepped forward, wiping his hands on an apron that had my initials embroidered on it. "Now, Maria, don't make a scene, it's just a little get-together. The boy is celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I snapped, my eyes locking onto Marco's. "Celebrating the fact that you changed the locks on my house." Marco's bravado kicked in. He took a swaggering step forward, puffing out his chest. Look, we needed to talk to you about that. Things have changed while you were away. He gestured expansively at the house, at the crowd. This place is too big for you. Isabella and I, we're building a life here. We've settled in. It's ours now. The words hung in air, thick and unbelievable. I felt a dizzying sense of disbelief. It's yours, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. This is my house, Marco. I bought it. I pay for it. He smirked. Yeah, about that. Look, you'll thank me later. You're always working. You're never here. We're putting it to good use, making it a family home. That's when my father delivered the final, crushing blow. He put a hand on Marco's shoulder, a look of immense pride on his face. He turned to me, his expression hard, devoid of the fatherly warmth I had craved my entire life. He deserves it more than you, Maria, my dad said, his voice firm. He's a man, starting a family. You have your career. It's only fair that he gets a head start. We all agreed this is for the best. The world tilted on its axis. My own father, standing in my desecrated backyard, telling me my brother deserved my home more than I did. My brother, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated entitlement, as if he were doing me a favor by stealing my life's biggest accomplishment. Isabella was preening beside him, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The part of me that had always sought their approval, that had bent over backward to be the good daughter, simply broke. All the years of being overlooked, of my achievements being minimized while Marco's failures were excused, coalesced into a single, clarifying point of rage. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at the three of them, my brother, his girlfriend, and my father, a united front against me, and a strange, cold calm washed over me. I gave a small, humorless smile. Interesting, I said. The single word was so unexpected, so devoid of the hysterical reaction they were clearly anticipating, that it threw them off balance. Marco's smirk faltered. My dad's brow furrowed in confusion. I turned without another word, my suitcase bumping behind me, and walked out of the gate, away from the loud music and the stunned faces of my so-called family. I didn't look back. I walked to the end of the street, pulled out my phone, and booked a room at the nicest hotel in the city. The cost was irrelevant. I needed a clean, quiet, and sane place to think. That night, in the sterile silence of my hotel room, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a methodical, chilling fury. They hadn't just overstepped a boundary, they had detonated it. They had conspired behind my back, counting on me being too far away to notice and too much of a pushover to fight back. They had miscalculated. Badly. My first call was to my cousin, Sophia. She was a paralegal and the only person in our extended family who saw the dynamic between me, Marco, and my father for what it was. She had warned me against letting Marco house sit. I could hear the concern in her voice when I recounted the story. Maria, I am so sorry, she said, her voice laced with anger on my behalf. But honestly, I'm not surprised. Your dad has always enabled him. What do I do, Sophia? I asked, my voice finally trembling. They changed the locks. They're in my house. Okay, deep breaths, she said, her professional paralegal calm kicking in. First thing tomorrow, you call a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a real estate litigation specialist. This is not a family squabble anymore, it's a legal issue. They are, for all intents and purposes, squatters, illegal occupants. You have the deed, you have the mortgage statements. The law is on your side. She was right. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about facts, ownership, and the law. The conversation with Sophia solidified my resolve. My next move was to check my home security system. Before I left for London, I had a state-of-the-art system installed, complete with cameras covering the exterior, the front door, the backyard, and the driveway. Marco knew about the system, but I suspected he was either arrogant enough to think I wouldn't check or stupid enough to forget. I logged into the app on my laptop. The live feeds were active. I watched in disgust as the party continued in my backyard, but the real gold was in the recorded history. I started scrolling back, day by day, week by week. The red flags were everywhere. The first flag was the moving van that had shown up 2 days after I left. Not a small van for a few boxes, but a full-sized moving truck. I watched the time-lapsed footage as Marco and Isabella, with my father's help, moved every piece of their furniture in. They didn't just occupy the guest room, they took over the entire house. The next flag was the footage of them removing my furniture. My comfortable sofa, my antique coffee table, my dining set, all of it was hauled out and loaded into a different truck. My stomach churned. Where did it go? Did they sell it? A quick search of online marketplaces for my area brought up a listing for a high-end modern dining set with pictures that were unmistakably of my furniture, taken in. My dining room, the listing was marked as sold. They had sold my belongings. The whispers and red flags were now a screaming siren. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I accessed my online accounts for the utility companies. The agreement was that Marco would pay the bills. I had forwarded him the first month's electric and water bills. When I checked the payment history, I saw they were severely overdue. They hadn't paid a single cent. They were living for free, using my electricity and water while running up a massive debt in my name. The final, and perhaps most audacious, discovery came from my email. I had a separate email address linked to my home's smart devices, the thermostat, the smart lock I had on my office door, and other automated systems. Buried in the junk folder was a notification from a home goods store confirming a delivery appointment. The order was for a complete nursery furniture set. A crib, a changing table, the works. It was scheduled to be delivered next week to my address, under Isabella's name. They weren't just living in my house. They were planning to raise a family in it. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all was stunning. They had a comprehensive plan to erase me from my own life, to simply take what was mine and claim it as their own, all with my father's blessing. They believed I would just roll over and accept it. They saw me as an obstacle to be managed, not a person to be respected. As I sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop illuminating the evidence of their betrayal, the rage in my heart cooled and hardened into something else entirely. A plan. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. The grief over my family's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a cold, clear determination. They thought they were clever. They thought they had planned for everything. But they were amateurs, and they had left a digital paper trail a mile wide. My meeting with the lawyer Sophia recommended, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, was at 10 a.m. I spent the 2 hours before the meeting meticulously organizing my evidence. I downloaded every piece of incriminating security footage. The moving truck arriving, my furniture being removed, the constant stream of guests for unauthorized parties. I took screenshots of the online listing where they sold my dining set. I printed the overdue utility bills, highlighting the non-payment and the ballooning late fees. I printed the email confirmation for the nursery furniture. I also found the informal, house-sitting agreement I had typed up, which Marco and I had both signed. It was simple, but it clearly stated they were guests, that they were to stay in the guest room, and that they were responsible for utilities. It explicitly forbade any alterations to the property. Changing the locks was a direct violation of that agreement. When I sat down in Ms. Albright's office and laid out my organized folder of evidence on her polished mahogany desk, her eyebrows shot up. She listened intently as I recounted the story, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to visible indignation. "Ms. Sanchez," she said when I finished, her voice crisp, "this is one of the most brazen cases of unlawful detainer I've seen. Your brother and his girlfriend are not tenants, they have no lease. At best, they were tenants at will, a status that was terminated the moment they violated your agreement and changed the locks. At worst, they are simply trespassers." She picked up the signed agreement. "This is excellent. It clearly establishes the terms of their stay, which they have systematically violated. And this," she tapped the printout of the sold furniture listing, "this is theft, pure and simple. We can and should file a police report for that." The plan she laid out was multi-pronged and ruthlessly efficient. Step 1 was the legal eviction process. She would draft an immediate notice to quit, a formal legal document giving them a legally mandated, but very short, period to vacate the premises. In our state, because there was no formal lease and no rent being paid, that period was just 3 days. The notice would be delivered by a professional process server, making it official and undeniable. Step 2 was securing my property. "You have every right to protect your asset," she explained. The moment that notice is served, we can arrange for a locksmith to meet you there. You regain control of your property. We will also inform the utility companies of the situation. We can have services suspended, citing fraudulent use, since the account is in your name and you did not authorize this level of consumption without payment. Step 3 was where my own tech skills came into play. Ms. Albright was focused on the legal and physical aspects, but I knew the digital world was where Marco and Isabella lived and breathed. Marco's identity was wrapped up in being a crypto mogul and an influencer. Isabella curated her life meticulously on social media. Their online personas were their currency, and I was about to devalue it. That afternoon, after leaving the lawyer's office with a clear plan of action, I went to work. The first part was a quiet act of digital reconnaissance. Since they were using my Wi-Fi network, I still had administrative access to the router. A few clicks, and I was looking at every device connected to my network. Their phones, their laptops, Isabella's tablet, even their smart TV. I didn't spy on their content, that was a line I wouldn't cross, but I did make a careful list of all their devices. Then I changed the Wi-Fi password. It was a small, petty act, but I knew it would be like cutting off their oxygen. Their entire social and professional lives depended on being online. Next, I combed through social media. Isabella's profile was public. I scrolled back through months of posts. While she hadn't posted photos inside my house, she had posted dozens of pictures of expensive dinners, new clothes, and weekend trips. The captions were all about living our best life and how their investments were paying off. It was a carefully crafted illusion of wealth and success, all funded by the money they saved living rent-free in my home and likely from selling my possessions. I took screenshots of everything. The most crucial piece of my digital counteroffensive involved the local community. My neighborhood had a very active homeowners association, HOA, with a notoriously strict set of rules and a very active online forum. I logged in and saw a few new threads in the complaints section. One was about an unfamiliar blue sports car consistently parked in a fire lane. Another was about loud music late on a Sunday night. A third was about an unkempt front yard violating community standards. All of them pointed directly at my address. The complaints were anonymous, but the frustration was palpable. This was my opening. I drafted a polite, carefully worded email to the HOA management company. I introduced myself as the legal owner of the property, explained that I had been abroad for an extended work assignment, and stated that my temporary house sitters had violated our agreement and were occupying the property without my consent. I mentioned that I was taking legal steps to have them removed and apologized profusely for the disturbances they had caused to the neighborhood. I assured the HOA that I would rectify all violations, the lawn, the unauthorized vehicle, everything, as soon as I regained access to my property. This email served two purposes. It positioned me as a responsible homeowner, and it officially put the HOA on notice. I knew that once the HOA was involved, they would bring their own unique brand of pressure to bear on Marco and Isabella. They had made enemies not just of me, but of the entire neighborhood. And the neighborhood, armed with its bylaws and fines, was about to become my unwitting ally. The digital paper trail wasn't just evidence anymore, it was a weapon, and I was ready to use it. With the legal and digital foundations laid, the next 48 hours were about assembling the final pieces of my arsenal. Every action was deliberate, a calculated step toward reclaiming my life and delivering a consequence so severe that Marco and my father would never forget it. First on the list was the police report. Walking into the local precinct to report my own brother for theft was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt like severing the final thread of what our family used to be, but Ms. Albright was firm. This is not a family dispute over a sentimental heirloom, Maria. This is grand larceny. They sold thousands of dollars of your property. You must treat it as such. I gave my statement to a calm, professional officer, providing the screenshots of the online listing and an itemized list of the furniture that was missing, along with its estimated value. The officer was sympathetic and assured me they would open an investigation. The act of filing the report was cathartic. It moved the crime out of the realm of a family drama and into the cold, hard light of the law. Marco wasn't just my entitled little brother anymore. He was now the subject of a criminal investigation. Next came the utilities. I called the electric company first. After verifying my identity with a series of security questions, I explained the situation. That I, the account holder, had been out of the country, and the current occupants were there without my permission and had been consuming services without payment. I used the term unauthorized occupants, as Ms. Albright had advised. The customer service representative was incredibly helpful. Because the account was in my name and the bills were delinquent, I had every right to request a disconnection. We scheduled it for 2 days later, on Friday afternoon at 5:00 p.m. I did the same with the Water and Gas Co. M-Panies, both scheduled a shutoff for the same time. The trifecta, no power, no water, no heat, would render the house essentially unlivable. The final piece of the utility puzzle was the internet. I didn't just change the password. I called my provider and canceled the service entirely. I explained that I was the homeowner but would be traveling again and didn't require the service. When they asked if anyone else was living there, I said, "No, the house will be vacant." It was a lie, but a necessary one. I knew this would cause Marco and Isabella the most immediate and profound panic. Their entire online facade would crumble without a connection. While I was dismantling their comfortable setup, my cousin Sophia was proving to be the most valuable ally I could have asked for. Her work as a paralegal gave her a network of contacts, one of which was a highly reputable locksmith and security firm. We arranged for them to meet me at the house on Friday at 5:30 p.m., just after the utilities were set to be cut. They would not only rekey all the locks, but also install a deadbolt that could only be opened from the outside with a specific high-security key. Sophia also had a friend who worked for a junk removal service. I booked them for Saturday morning. I didn't know what state the interior of my house was in, but based on the backyard, I anticipated the worst. I wanted anything they had left behind gone immediately. My goal was to erase any trace of their existence from my home within 24 hours of reclaiming it. The most satisfying part of the plan, however, was leveraging the HOA. The management company responded to my email within hours. They were deeply concerned and thanked me for my proactive communication. They confirmed they had already issued 2 written warnings to the current residents of my address for the lawn maintenance and parking violations, both of which had been ignored. They were now escalating to daily fines, which were being mailed to the house, addressed to me, of course. I almost laughed. Marco and Isabella were probably throwing the letters away without a second thought, completely unaware that they were racking up hundreds of dollars in fines that would ultimately become a lien against my property if unpaid. I replied to the HOA, thanking them and adding one more piece of information. "I've also just been made aware," I wrote, "that the occupants may be planning to host a large party this coming Friday evening. Given the previous complaints about noise, I wanted to give you a heads up." The HOA manager's response was swift. "Thank you for the information, Ms. Sanchez. We will ensure our community security patrol is paying special attention to your property on Friday night." I had just sixed the notoriously meticulous HOA security on their party. The final piece of the arsenal was the notice itself. On Thursday morning, the process server, a large, imposing man who looked like he could double as a bodyguard, went to the house. I had the security camera feed open on my laptop, my heart pounding as I watched from my hotel room. He rang the doorbell. Isabella answered, looking annoyed. He said her name, handed her the legal documents, and said curtly, "You've been served." He took a picture to document the service and walked away. I watched as Isabella stood in the doorway, her face contorting from confusion to disbelief to rage as she read the notice to quit. The trap was set. The eviction notice was delivered. The utilities were scheduled for disconnection. The locksmith was booked. The police were investigating. The HOA was watching. All that was left to do was wait for them to walk right into it. And I knew Marco. He was arrogant. He would see the notice not as a legal threat, but as a challenge. He would think he could ignore it, that he could call Daddy to make it go away. He would absolutely still have his party, and that was exactly what I was counting on. Friday arrived, charged with a nervous, electric energy. From the vantage point of my hotel room, I became the director of a real-time drama, watching it all unfold on my laptop screen. The day started quietly. I saw Marco leave in the morning in his flashy sports car. Isabella left a little later. They were likely off to their respective jobs, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. My phone buzzed at 2:00 p.m. It was Ms. Albright. "Just confirming, Maria." The notice gave them until tomorrow at noon to vacate. By ignoring it, they have officially forfeited any rights they might have had as occupants. You are clear to proceed. The first tangible sign of the plan kicking into gear happened at exactly 5:00 p.m. I had the backyard camera feed open. The string lights they had hung over the patio suddenly flickered and died. The house was now without power. At 5:05 p.m., a municipal truck pulled up, and a worker spent a few minutes at the water main near the curb. The water was gone. The house on the screen was now a dark, silent box, stripped of its modern comforts. At 5:30 p.m., as scheduled, the locksmith's van pulled up. I was already there, waiting in my rental car at the end of the street. I met the two men and we walked up to the front door. It felt surreal to be approaching my own home like a covert operative. As they efficiently drilled out the old lock Marco had installed, my phone buzzed. It was an angry text from my father. "What is this nonsense, Maria?" Marco called. "The power is out. Fix it. This is not how you treat family." I looked at the message, felt a flicker of the old guilt, and then extinguished it. I typed a simple reply, "It's being handled." Then I blocked his number. I blocked Marco's and Isabella's numbers too. I was done with their noise. The locksmiths were finished in 20 minutes. They handed me a new set of high-security keys. The feeling of that solid metal in my hand was the feeling of taking back control. I walked inside my house for the first time in over 6 months. The stench of stale beer and garbage hit me like a physical blow. The place was a disaster. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, pizza boxes littered the living room, and there were clothes strewn everywhere. It was worse than I imagined, but there was no time to process. I had one more thing to do. I had printed a large, laminated copy of the official eviction notice. Using heavy-duty tape, I affixed it squarely to the outside of the front door. Then, I printed another sign in bold, black letters. "This property is under surveillance. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." I taped that right below the first notice. Then I left, locking the new deadbolt behind me, and drove back to my spot at the end of the street to watch the final act. The guests for the housewarming party started arriving around 7:00 p.m. I watched car after car pull up, with people dressed for a party, carrying gifts and bottles of alcohol. They walked up to the dark house, looking confused. They milled about on the lawn, checking their phones, likely trying to call Marco. Around 7:30, Marco's blue sports car finally roared down the street. He and Isabella got out, laughing, until they saw the crowd of confused guests on their, or rather, my lawn. Marco's swagger was on full display as he walked up to the front door, clearly planning to smooth everything over. I zoomed in with the security camera. I saw him reach for his key, then stare at the doorknob. His key didn't fit. Confusion turned to anger as he jiggled the handle fruitlessly. That's when he saw the notices taped to the door. I couldn't hear him, but I could see everything. I saw him read the eviction notice, his face paling. I saw him rip it off the door, his movements frantic. Then he saw the second notice about surveillance. His head snapped up, and he stared directly into the camera lens. For a heart-stopping moment, I felt like he was looking right at me. The performance he gave next was spectacular. He started screaming. He wasn't just yelling, it was a full-blown, foot-stomping, primal scream of rage. He kicked the door, he threw the crumpled notice on the ground. Isabella burst into tears. Their guests, witnessing this unhinged meltdown, began backing away, getting into their cars, and driving off. The perfect image they had curated was shattering in real time. Then, as if on cue, a white SUV with HOA security emblazoned on the side pulled up. A uniformed guard got out, his expression stern. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I could imagine it. The guard was likely informing Marco that he was causing a disturbance, that his car was illegally parked, and that this large gathering was a violation. The combination of being locked out, publicly humiliated, and now confronted by an authority figure was too much for Marco. The camera feed showed him screaming at the guard, pointing wildly at the house. Isabella was pulling at his arm, trying to get him to stop. This was the moment. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance at my property," I said calmly. "The address is 123 Maple Street. I'm the owner. My evicted former occupants are trespassing and have become aggressive with HOA security." Within 10 minutes, 2 police cars, sirens silent but lights flashing, turned onto my street. The sight of the police was the final nail in the coffin. Marco's fight instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer panic. The officers separated everyone, talking to the HOA guard, then to a weeping Isabella, and finally to a deflated Marco. I watched as they ran his name. I wondered if the theft report I filed had been processed yet. One of the officers walked to the front door, read the notice I had posted, and then walked back to Marco. The conversation was short. A few minutes later, Marco and Isabella were being escorted to their car. An officer stood by until they had driven away. The street was finally quiet. The tie was over, the house was mine. The morning after the failed housewarming party was grimly satisfying. The junk removal service I'd hired arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. I stood on the porch, directing them. "Everything that isn't a permanent fixture," I said. "I want it gone." They were ruthlessly efficient. They hauled out the cheap, particle board furniture Marco and Isabella had brought in. They bagged up clothes, electronics, and kitchenware. Every trace of them was put into the back of a massive truck. Among the items, they found several unopened boxes of nursery furniture. I told them to take that, too. By noon, the house was an empty, echoing shell. It smelled of cleaning products instead of garbage. The process was a purge, a necessary and cleansing ritual to reclaim my space. While the crew worked, my phone, which I had unblocked, began to explode. There were dozens of missed calls and a flood of text messages, a digital torrent of panic and rage. They came from my father, my brother, and even some extended family members who had clearly only heard one side of the story. Marco's texts were a chaotic jumble of threats and pleas. "You can't do this to us. We have nowhere to go. You'll pay for this." Followed minutes later by, "Maria, please, we can talk about this. I'm sorry. Just let us get our stuff." My father's messages were laced with disappointment and fury. "You have shamed this family. To call the police on your own brother? What is wrong with you? He made a mistake, but you are destroying his life over a house. You have a cold heart, Maria." Each message was a small twist of the knife, but the wounds were old. Their words no longer had the same power. The most telling communication came from a number I didn't recognize. It was my aunt, my father's sister. "Your father and brother are here," she wrote. "They are telling everyone you threw them out on the street for no reason. I know there are 2 sides to every story. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and called her. For 20 minutes I told her everything, leaving nothing out. The agreement, the sold furniture, the unpaid bills, the eviction notice, the police report for theft. I sent her the photos and screenshots. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when I finished. "Oh, Maria," she finally said, her voice heavy with sadness. "I am so sorry. We had no idea." The fallout spread quickly through the family after that. My aunt, armed with the truth, was not one to stand by silently. The narrative of poor Marco, the victim of his cruel, rich sister, began to fall apart. The fact that he was being investigated for felony theft was a particularly difficult detail for my father to spin. Marco and Isabella ended up moving into my father's small, 2-bedroom retirement condo. I can only imagine how crowded and tense that environment must be. Isabella, according to my aunt, left Marco about a month later. The dream of a big house and an influencer lifestyle had evaporated, leaving only the reality of living with her unemployed boyfriend and his overbearing father. The last I heard, she had moved back in with her parents in another state. Marco's legal troubles were just beginning. With the evidence I provided, the district attorney pressed charges for the theft of my furniture. Given the value, it was a serious charge. Ms. Albright advised me that these things move slowly, But Marco was now entangled in the legal system, a consequence of his own arrogance. As for my father, our relationship is fractured, perhaps irreparably. He called me one last time a week after the incident. His anger was gone, replaced by a weary, pleading tone. "Just drop the charges, Maria," he begged. "He's your brother. He's learned his lesson. Don't ruin his future." "His choices ruined his future, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. "Where were you when he was selling my belongings? Where were you when he was planning to take my home? You told me he deserved it more than I did, so let him deal with the consequences he deserves." I didn't say it with malice, but with a profound sense of finality. He had no answer. We haven't spoken since. Rebuilding my life has been a slow process. I had to buy all new furniture, but this time, every piece felt truly mine, chosen for my own comfort and taste. I had to pay off the massive utility bills and the HOA fines, a bitter but necessary expense to clear my name. I invested in an even more advanced security system. But more importantly, I started building a new foundation for my life, one not based on the conditional approval of my father and brother, but on my own worth and the relationships I choose to nurture. My cousin Sophia and I are closer than ever. My aunt and I speak regularly. I am forging a new definition of family, one built on mutual respect and honesty, not on obligation and entitlement. Sometimes, I stand in my quiet living room and look out at the garden I have since replanted. It's peaceful again. I lost a brother and a father, but in doing so, I found my own strength and reclaimed my life. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.